One of the things that has become really apparent to me over 40 years of working as a psychotherapist is that everyone wants to feel safe. And for most people, in most of our childhoods, there were a lot of periods when we didn't feel safe. Maybe just, 2 minutes, maybe 2 years. And it turns out there are really only five basic safety strategies.
Cool. Awesome, Steven. Great to have you on. So I just read your book. It was recommended to me by a good friend at a lunch. It was a couple of my close friends who all happen to be enduring patterns, which I want to ask you about, and our
Uh,
wives. And he was basically sharing about this book. He really loves your work, and he was basically typing us, and I found it very interesting. So I started reading it thinking, oh, this will probably be great for my interpersonal relationships, my misunderstandings with friends, with my wife, etc. But I was actually really pleasantly surprised to find myself understanding myself better, both in terms of self-compassion, but also maybe more objectively looking at things about myself that I typically thought of as virtues and recognizing maybe they're not necessarily. So there's a lot of things I want to speak to you about. But just so
Great.
everyone knows where we're coming from, could you explain what the five personality patterns are?
Sure. Um, the easiest way to understand them is to think of them as each growing out of a particular safety strategy that a child uses to try to feel safer. One of
Mhm.
the things that has become really apparent to me over 40 years of working as a psychotherapist is that everyone wants to feel safe. That is everybody's first priority. And for most people, in most of our childhoods, there were a lot of periods when we didn't feel safe. Maybe just, 2 minutes, maybe 2 years. But all of us as kids um, were looking around for whatever we could do that would help us feel safer in our particular family, in our particular culture, whatever gender we were, whatever birth order we were, whoever our parents and our siblings were, all of that stuff. We would look for what safety strategies would work for us. Um, and it turns out there are really only five basic safety strategies. I actually checked this out because I wanted to make sure um, I wasn't. I this was received knowledge for me, and I wanted to make sure that this was true. But the five ways that as a child, and especially in the time before you can run away or fight back, the five things you can do. The first one is you can take your energy and your awareness, your life energy and your awareness away from whatever is bothering you. You can leave your body. The second thing you can do is you can connect with whoever else is there, even if they're the person who's upsetting you, and you can try to get them to um, to help you feel better. That's exactly what a child does when it cries. It's crying out for attention. Basically, it's saying, "I have a problem. Come and fix it for me," which is exactly the best thing for the kid to do at that age. Um, as a kid gets a little older and will and strength come online, this is around 2 years old now, other possibilities come online. One is the kid um, can pull their energy in and send it down into the lower part of their body and even into the ground below them to hide. They can basically hunker down and hide and just endure whatever storm is happening up here and let it blow over. The fourth option is to bring your energy up into your body, up into the upper part of your body, and try to get as big and strong and intimidating as you can, and somehow dominate the other person. Get them to do what you need them to do. Get them to give you what you want or be who you want, whatever that is. And the fifth one, the last one that typically comes online, is um, you you can use all that you've learned from your parents or your environment about who they want you to be and what's okay to try to be a good boy or a good girl. You can follow the rules. You can constrict your body to try to sort of narrow and diminish the flow of life energy and awareness through your body so that you don't feel so much in your own body, but you're more able to attend to the surface of your body and to your performance, and you can try to perform better.
To follow the
Right?
rules.
Follow the rules. So the 5 options are: go away, leave, connect, try to get help from them, merging pattern, hunker down and hide, enduring pattern, pull it up, get big and intimidate them, becomes the aggressive pattern, or perform well, becomes the rigid pattern.
And this idea originated with Reich, is that right?
Wilhelm Reich, that's right. I think he first published a book about this in the 1930s.
And he used the Freudian, pathological terms, right?
He used
like
very
schizoid,
Freudian, very pathologizing terms, which were generally continued in use up through the books written in the 50s and 60s and 70s, even ones written in the 90s. And one of the things I did was shift the names of the patterns to what you actually do to try to get away, so it's not so pathologizing. Leaving pattern, merging pattern, enduring pattern, aggressive pattern, rigid pattern.
Yeah, one of the things I found so interesting is that, like with interpersonal conflict, I think most people are aware a lot of things come from misunderstandings, different worldviews, different cultures. But this actually goes like even deeper than that. Because so for an example, one of my really good friends, actually most of my male friends seem to be enduring patterns. I want to get your opinion on why that might be later. But this one friend, we have a lot of great philosophical discussions. We typically agree on very complex issues, except when it comes to moral dilemmas involving honor. We always we totally miss each other. We're in different worlds. We can't seem to understand each other. As I've diagnosed from your book, I'm fairly aggressive pattern. He's enduring. He just doesn't understand why something like honor would matter when it causes discomfort. I don't understand how he couldn't understand. And we just completely miss each other. And it's not even a cultural thing. It's like our primal view of the world is so different when it comes to this one subject.
Yeah. I think the thing to remember there is that a kid who develops the enduring pattern is typically a kid who lost all the fights with their parents or lost most of them. And because they were losing all the fights, they came to a decision that I can't win. It's pointless. There's just no point in fighting and trying to win. It's wiser to hunker down and just endure, because then I can at least choose when I lose. Whereas a kid who develops aggressive pattern is more a kid who won most of the fights with their parents. So they learned, hey, the more energy I bring up, the bigger I become, the more intimidating I become, the more I kind of lean forward and the more I get what I want. Yeah. So for them, aggression works, and then honor, of course, is kind of, the rules for aggression among people who win the fights. Right? I don't think that honor is really the code for people who lose all the fights.
Yeah,
because get the hell out of here.
When I argue with him, I can usually come up with a logical explanation of oh yeah, if you let this person push you around, maybe it's not a big deal, but they'll do it again. If you let Hitler take the Sudetenland, he's going to take over Europe. You can't let them get away with it. But he's why would you do that? Why would you put yourself through that pain over something that isn't practical? It doesn't make sense to him.
Yeah, you can't let them get away with it versus they're going to get away with it anyway. Why do I want to stand in the way of that storm?
Yeah. And I remember some of my earliest memories are winning or overpowering my mom with a tantrum or something. And a lot of these things just clicked, it's oh yeah, okay. I'm not an aggressive person, but my earliest memories are winning, I think.
Well, all kids try out having a tantrum to get their way. I mean, kids are incredibly creative and smart, and they will try out every method they can figure out to get what they want. It's very
Mm-hmm.
practical and pragmatic for them. And whatever methods work, they will continue doing. And then that method, that safety strategy, will gradually develop into a whole personality pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the personality patterns develop out of the safety strategies. Whatever safety strategies work for you, you do more and more and more. They get conditioned into your body, and they develop a whole self-reinforcing cycle, which causes you to develop that entire personality pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to notice that the way you move your attention shifts your experience of the situation. And it shifts your perceptions, your raw perceptions. It actually shifts what you perceive in the situation. That shifts your way of experiencing it, which colors and shapes your beliefs about it, which reinforces the beginning supposition of, I should do this. This will work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of what really sold me on the book before I really read the whole thing was in the aggressive pattern chapter. Actually, in all the chapters, you list thoughts that such a person
Yeah,
would have,
yeah, yeah.
and like there's pretty much every sentence you wrote, like, oh, an aggressive person thinks this sometimes. Like, I think that pretty often, or I've thought that
That's
before.
right. That's
It's like,
right.
yeah,
And isn't that amazing that that's true for all of us?
hmm
I mean, I didn't make those up. Those came from people who were both working on themselves and caught in a particular pattern. And that's what they would relate. And I was
hmm
fortunately in a situation where I was in a class and we were studying all this. And so we would have, out of 20 people in the class, we'd have, because each person does two patterns, not just one. So we'd have, 5 or more people who do each pattern. And then when we'd be saying, so, well, what do you guys, what thoughts come to you? And we'd have 5 or 10 people who can say, well, this is what it is for me.
hmm.
And I collected all that material.
Yeah, and and that also with reading the thoughts of the other patterns, it did help me understand. Actually, I did want to ask you first. I did notice almost all my close male friends are enduring patterns. And I
Yeah.
was wondering if there's anything that you've seen with like people fitting out. I actually spoke to some of them and they're like, well, an enduring pattern probably can take the charge of an aggressive person better than others, so they stick around. But I'm
And
curious your
that's
thoughts.
exactly it. There actually is some benefit to a connection of friendship or love affair or whatever between people who run those two patterns.
Hmm
Because the person who does aggressive pattern brings a lot of energy to the interaction. And energy is the thing that the person in enduring pattern is missing. They've taken their life energy and sent it down into the ground to hide. And the problem for them is they tend to get stuck down there. The energy flow slows down or stops, and then they feel very stuck and heavy and like, I can't move and I can't do anything. Like, it's safe down here, but I can't do anything. When the other person is bringing a lot of energy to the exchange, they can use some of that energy to get them up and going. And the other benefit is, as you said, they're more able to hunker down and endure the storm than people in any other pattern.
hmm
When a person who runs aggressive pattern typically has a naturally stronger flow of life energy through their body than most people do. If they didn't have that, they couldn't pull it off, right? You can't run more energy than the other person and intimidate them unless you actually have more energy available to you.
So I have
Go
another
ahead.
close friend who's an enduring type. And he and I have kind of like a sibling energy where I think our patterns come out a lot. Like I've known him for 10 years.
Uh-huh.
I love spending time with him, but I don't think there's anyone I've yelled at more as an adult than him. Like cause like
Yes,
he can take my yelling and he seems to
exactly.
neutralize it in a way where like we don't really fight, but actually makes me more frustrated. because I'm not getting my way with him, but we're not like getting anywhere. And it really brings out my aggression. We both read the book recently, and we've been talking about like, yeah, every time we fight, we go straight into like these textbook patterns essentially, where he doesn't want to do anything and I get frustrated. He doesn't want to do anything. Anyway, I'm just repeating
you
your
can't
book.
make me is the motto of enduring pattern. And it's true, you can't make them. Like he has the strength of the immovable object and you have the strength of the irresistible force. But he would be it's the only other pattern that can resist or that can endure being hit full force by the amount of energy that a person who's running an aggressive pattern can muster. And the thing that I was going to say before is people who don't do either aggressive pattern or enduring pattern, who do two other patterns of the other three, for them, being hit with that much force, that much energy, makes them not want to continue the relationship. It's too overwhelming. I mean, their solution, like if they do leaving pattern, their solution is I simply leave, I'm leaving the room right now or I'm divorcing you. But it disorganizes them in a way that it doesn't disorganize a person who runs enduring pattern. They're used to it. Their pattern is built for that. And if you have another aggressive pattern person, the two of you fight it out, and maybe you do it according to an honorable set of rules, and maybe you even both enjoy that. Yeah. But you fight it at an energy level that nobody else can tolerate.
Yeah, I actually feel peace anytime we can just lay it all on the table. But I've learned over the years, most people don't like it. I was in a community of people. This is in a different city I was living in, where there's one guy who's really in his aggressive pattern, and he would really turn off everyone in our friend group. Yeah. But I was just like, if you yell back at him once, he becomes super docile and friendly. Like other people didn't get it,
Those are strategies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've noticed so my wife is very leaving, and I've gotten kind of confused and frustrated at times where she kind of seems to leave her body when we're having, I think, an important conversation. And I've also noticed,
same thing for her to do. She can't fight back against you.
Yeah. Right? And we were looking, because she's had lifelong insomnia, like lots of sensitivity with sleep and stuff. But we spoke to her mother about it.
Down to a low enough level to fall asleep.
Exactly. Like if she watches TV within 3 hours of bed, like it keeps her up all night. Apparently she was the third child. Her mom was really busy, and she left my wife as a baby in the playpen in a wide open space. And that's where she slept her entire infancy. And we think that's maybe why she just felt unsafe in this big open space. So she just always left her body. And that's why she behaves this way when she's overwhelmed now.
Yeah. I mean, my sense of trying to figure out the why did someone develop XYZ patterns? Because people have a primary and a secondary pattern typically. That's a difficult thing to do because there are so many factors. There are cultural factors, there are gender factors, there are family factors. And then there's the question of, well, maybe they came into this life having decided to develop those two patterns in order to give them the tools they needed to learn whatever they're trying to learn in this life. There are people who, follow that way of understanding the world. So, we all want to know why, but that one's a tough one in my experience.
Hard I guess, know for sure. If anything, you can maybe find something that confirms, right? Like I look at my fights with my mom as So actually on that note, because I mentioned family, I also want to ask you about culture. My daughter's almost 2. She definitely, maybe it's too early to determine what pattern, but she seems like she's an aggressive pattern. She is literally in her terrible 2s though. So maybe all kids are like this. My first child, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, in general, parenting a child out of being in any pattern towards presence. But But also, I just want to share one thing that was really eye-opening for me in the aggressive pattern is recognizing that I myself, and maybe everyone in aggressive pattern, separates power and love. And you said that you
Yeah,
choose power.
yeah,
And the solution, or a solution you share, is like finding both power and love at the same time.
they,
Which made me think of like seeking religion, honestly, which I haven't been drawn to in a long time. But also with my daughter, rather, I have noticed, well, one, my mom would often give love without power until I really overwhelmed her, and then she would give power without love. And my dad did too. And I
yeah,
noticed when I'm overwhelmed with my daughter, when she's having a tantrum, I'll give her love at first, but once I'm overwhelmed, it's power. Like I'm just going to force her into the high chair or
yeah,
whatever, right?
yeah.
And I'm like, oh, well, this is, and I kind of already knew this was an insecure reaction of me, but I'm like, really being focused on having power and love at the same time is actually honestly a new concept to me, and I never thought about it.
Yeah. And the skills that you'll need to develop in order to be able to pull that off are you'll really need to practice the basic energy skills. You're probably already pretty good at core. That comes with doing the aggressive pattern. It's people who do aggressive pattern are typically already practicing core, so that's strong. But you also need to practice grounding yourself, really deeply grounding yourself. I mean, all the way down to the heart of the earth, the heart of planet Earth. And the supportive and protective thing about that is the planet Earth is bigger than you and I. It's so much bigger. We can't hurt it, but we can connect to it as a friend. The people in tribal cultures refer to the Earth as Grandmother Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, they mean the kind of grandmother who would always have a big hug for you and a plate of cookies and, hot chocolate. And she was glad to hear from you. And she would be glad to have you sit on her lap and tell her all about whatever is going on for you in your life. But a wonderful, wonderful grandmother, but with a strong, deeply grounded feminine energy in it. So practice grounding. You'll need to be able to ground the amount of energy that your daughter is putting out in her tantrum.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, surround her with a kind of a bubble of energy which contains her. She needs to feel that her tantrum is contained by something bigger than her and stronger than her, and also loving and caring. That's what we all need. As little kids, we can't face the whole world. We're too small. We need to feel contained and cared for at the same time. So we can have our strength, but we don't have to fear our strength. Because if we do something that's really not a good idea, something bigger than us will stop us, and stop us in a kind way, in a loving way, without losing the heart-to-heart love connection.
Yeah, something I've noticed, and I don't want to just speak about the aggressive pattern, even though it's what I'm most interested in. Something I've noticed in martial arts, which probably attracts mostly aggressive pattern
Who else wants to
people.
fight?
Right. Well, I've noticed like when doing jujitsu with high school age boys, who of course have a lot, they're trying out machismo and they have their testosterone boost and aggression. There's usually a big attitude until you can prove you can beat them without hurting them. And then they
Yes.
just love you. Like, and I've done
Yes.
jujitsu in countries where they don't speak English and I don't speak their language. And I've made like these kind of strong bonds in this way with other
Yes.
aggressive type people.
Yes. There's
Yeah.
always that testing process for people who do aggressive pattern. And that's because behind the aggressive pattern, not being felt, there is a very deep terror. The pattern develops in a child in a time when the kid is so scared they're afraid they're going to die. And most of the patterns develop in in similar times. But this kid's solution to, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to die and no one is coming to help me. This kid's solution is to go inside and pull up as much will and strength as they can find and then will themselves through the scary situation. And when they discover that they can will themselves through the scary situation, they realize, oh, this works for me. I'll just keep doing this. Right?
Yeah, it actually makes me kind of sad to think that on some level my daughter feels there's no one coming to save her. So I don't know if she is an aggressive pattern, but
yeah, I wouldn't go that
at some
far.
point
I wouldn't say that. I mean, all kids have tantrums because they can't yet regulate their own inner state.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's one of the main differences between being a child and being an adult. Children are not able to regulate their own inner state, so they need help from other people, bigger, more adult people, to regulate themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we expect adults to be able to regulate themselves. When a person refers to another adult by saying, oh, he's such a child, what the person means is they're not able to regulate their own inner state, and they keep needing me to do it for them. Right?
Could you speak to the other 4 patterns then on parenting a child out of that?
Well, I don't think anyone is going to be able to raise a child in such a way that they never develop any of these patterns.
Mm-hmm.
The best we can do is that they develop their patterns lightly. They wear them lightly, if you will. They don't get so caught in them. But the thing that let me say it this way. The best way to think about it is to contrast being caught in a pattern to being present in the moment. Mm-hmm. When a person is present in the moment, they're here in this time, in this place, in this situation, taking in what's really going on here and able to compose a response to it that is hopefully fairly elegant and works in this particular moment. Mm-hmm. When a person is caught in a pattern, they're caught in a pattern that's from their past, a pattern they developed in an earlier time and place, and they're still responding to that situation, even though it may not even be the same as this situation. Right? So, for instance, with a person caught in aggressive pattern, the first automatic, unconscious, involuntary response in the body is more energy comes up and lean forward and, threaten. Mm-hmm. Maybe, get ready to fight. Even if that's really not a good choice in this particular time and place. Like with your 2-year-old daughter, it's really not a great move, right? Mm-hmm. She needs you to stay loving and in a way, surround her and let her know it's okay and help her system calm down because she's not able to do that for herself yet, but let her know that she's safe enough that it can calm down. Mm-hmm. So for all parents with all kids, for all people in all situations, my recommendation is learn about what patterns you tend to get caught in, develop the basic energy skills that you need to get out of those patterns, and practice getting out of pattern every day. Especially the more you practice it, the more you're able to get out of pattern when things are getting bad and it's really hard to get out of pattern, right? Mm-hmm. It's like any other skill. The more you practice it in a safe place, the more you can do it in an unsafe place. You learn to meditate in a quiet space so that you can maintain a focused attention even in the airport.
Yeah, I have found that with this model, actually, I mean, and this maybe is my judgmental, aggressive side at times. Like I've been quite judgmental of other personality typings, not because of the system being wrong, but because my judgment at least is that spiritual people tend to like put themselves in boxes or use it to be special. Anyway, I have my judgments, but I don't need to list. But what I found really useful about this is that having these labels for different behaviors make it a little bit easier in the
Yeah.
moment so far. Like what I took from attachment theory, which of course is a different system and maybe has a lot of parallels, is that the best way to parent is to be secure. Be secure, you'll raise a
Exactly.
secure child. But being secure is kind of an abstract idea, whereas like being very specific, being, oh, I'm showing power without love, which is insecure of me.
Yes.
I can be more specific, which has been very
Yes.
easy. And even with my wife, who's an adult, obviously, when she's in leaving pattern, just recognizing, oh, I shouldn't be offended that she's left her body, right? That she's not really here anymore. This is just
Right.
what she does. And yeah.
It's a signal to you that you need to turn down the volume,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just like if you want to play your favorite music and you turn it up to 10 and the other person puts their hands over their ears, that's a signal that they don't like it at 10.
Mm-hmm.
Too much for them. And in terms of attachment theory, we're talking about something which is conditioned into the body in a way that is completely automatic and involuntary. It's not an idea in your mind. It's it's an automatic response that has been conditioned into your body over your life and your experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And being present in the moment is basically is very similar to what attachment theory would call being in a secure attachment.
Mm-hmm.
You feel safe in the moment and you trust that it's going to be okay, and whatever thing is happening between you and the other person is not really a danger to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious, do people's patterns ever change over their life? Maybe, they grow up with a certain pattern and it just doesn't work in their adolescence and they switch.
I haven't seen that. Um, I think the primary and secondary can switch if
Mm-hmm.
life circumstances demand that. But I haven't seen situations where people who are over, I don't know, 8 or 10 years old will develop a completely new pattern.
Mm-hmm.
What I have seen very often, and what, as you say, makes this map of personality useful, is that people will tend to use their favorite automatic patterns in almost any situation, even when it's really not a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where becoming more aware of this map and aware of personal automatic tendencies becomes important. And then practicing getting yourself out of pattern so that, for instance, if you're in some kind of situation where you feel a little uncomfortable and you notice yourself going into one of your favorite patterns, you can notice that before it becomes a problem for everybody else. And you can start taking steps inside yourself to bring yourself back to being present. Because being present is the ideal.
Yeah. What about, because one thing you mentioned, especially with like the energy flow, is that it affects a person's body type uh, to some degree, at least.
Yeah,
What about
body
when
shape, I would say.
one's body shape changes? Like someone grows up really skinny and then they become super heavy later. There's probably like behavioral justifications that can lead to that too, but I'm curious about that.
Oh, absolutely. Um, yeah, I mean, I've certainly seen lots of situations in my decades of therapy where a woman was quite slender in her young womanhood, and then somewhere in her 20s maybe was date raped, and then put on 40 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not a change in personality patterns. That's that her body made a decision. Oh, being that hot led to being raped. I don't want that anymore. I'll get less hot, right? Less attractive, less likely to draw that response from a guy, even a guy that I like and I'm dating.
You wouldn't attribute that to maybe her switching to an enduring strategy because she had to endure a traumatic event, for
You
instance?
know, I don't want to say anything is absolute because I don't really know that. But I haven't seen instances of that happening in adulthood.
Gotcha. Okay.
Even the people that I've known, I've been in various spiritual practice schools, and I have known some people that look to me like that person is actually pretty enlightened. I would say that person is enlightened, and maybe there's more to go, but it's way beyond me. Um, and they're still behaving in the, I can still say, oh, well, they probably do these two patterns because that's the behavior that I see. I think it becomes so much a part of a person's personality structure that it's difficult to change in later life.
I guess, yeah. I mean, my one anecdote related to this is one of my other male friends who's a very much enduring pattern and quite a bit heavy. And I mean, he's been heavier and he's had issues getting his weight off.
Mhm.
Around when I met him, but in the years before I really knew him, he was very thin, and his personality was very different too. Like he was super liberal.
Mhm.
Now he's like quite conservative, and it's like all of a sudden, as his worldview changed, his body changed
Oh,
quite dramatically. And maybe
okay.
it's unrelated, but it's what came to mind.
I haven't seen that, so I really can't comment on it.
Hmm. Fair
I mean,
enough.
let's remain humble here. There's a lot of stuff that I haven't seen and I don't know about this whole
Hmm.
thing. So I don't know.
Sure. So I do want to go to speak about culture, and maybe this is more opinion than related to your work directly. But uh, right after I read your book, I came across an essay by Aldous Huxley called "Religion and Temperament," and he was
Okay.
basically taking the three doshas from Ayurveda, or he
Mhm.
was using William Sheldon's terminology: cerebrotonic, somatotonic, viscerotonic, three constitutions of people, and how these different types of people, with their different tendencies and desires, have shaped the major religions. So, like the viscerotonic people, who seem maybe somewhat like the enduring type, are the reason why there's festivals and celebration and sangha and communal aspects in the major religions. The somatotonic types, or maybe similar to the aggressive types, are the reason why there were crusades and jihad and building of cathedrals and
Mhm.
missionary work. And
Mhm.
then the
Mhm.
mystical stuff came from the cerebrotonic people, who are maybe leaving pattern,
Yeah.
the inward stuff, mysticism. I'm curious what you think about the general idea and how you maybe have noticed culture and society shaped by the five patterns. What one thing I saw you mention is how all the hero stories are about aggressive type people, like the heroes and villains.
Yeah.
And then I'm
Yeah.
curious about other aspects of society if you've noticed
Well,
anything.
if it's a hero story in which the main event is a fight, you have to think about who wants to have a fight, who's willing to stay for the fight, you know? And it's basically the people who do aggressive pattern, and maybe their combination is aggressive and enduring, because that would be the body structure that's most capable in a physical fight. I haven't read Aldous Huxley's essay, but from your description, it sounds to me like he's talking about the three um, biological body types that are known as um, ectomorph, endomorph, and mesomorph. Um, and that's been observed in the development of an ovum when it first is just a little cluster of cells. When it first bends in on itself and becomes a sphere rather than just a plane, because it develops into three layers, and then the question is, how do those arrange themselves in the sphere? Um, this may be. I mean, this is another piece of the puzzle. In If you imagine a child growing up in a certain family, in a certain culture, in a certain historical time period or whatever, with a certain gender, and then you put in, okay, this person's body is more mesomorph, more muscular, or this person's body is more ectomorph, more nervous system, brain emphasis, that kid is going to have different inherent talents. The kid who's more ectomorph body, who's more prone to energy, extra energy going into the nervous system, that kid is going to be more sensitive and more interested in abstract thought. Kid who's more mesomorph, more energy goes into the muscles, that kid is better at fighting and not so good at thinking. Whereas the first kid is not good at fighting. So we're back to the situation of each of us uses in our childhood the talents we happen to have as a little kid to solve the problems we encounter.
Mm-hmm. Have you noticed different cultures or maybe ideologies celebrate certain patterns over others?
Oh, sure. I mean, where do you live? Are you in the US or?
Well, I'm in Peru right now, but I grew
You're
up
in
in New
Peru.
York.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't speak about Peru. I don't know. But I live in the United States, and this culture clearly has a tendency towards aggressive pattern. I mean, we believe that we have the God-given right to go bomb whoever is pissing us off, right? Very few cultures have that belief or put so much money into their military that they can pull it off.
Actually, something just popped in my head. Because a lot of like political theorists have compared the development of a society to the development of a child or a person.
Yeah, adult development.
Could we say that the aggressive pattern of American culture developed because it won its first fight against its parent in 1776? I mean, had they lost, they might have been enduring.
That's an interesting way to think about it. Then you have to also examine all the countries that started out as a colony and then had a fight against the colonial power and won that fight. And what did they do? And I don't know that most of them sort of leaned so hard into aggressive pattern. I mean, if you look at, for instance, rigid pattern, follow the rules, keep everything in order, countries like Japan and Holland are pretty strong examples of that. There are a lot of countries that are more enduring pattern. For instance, Russia, the old Soviet Union. You know, they went straight from a czarist system into a communist dictatorship, and nobody has grown up in a country in which their preference or their vote is really going to make much difference. So why bother? You know?
Yeah, actually, something my wife and I have spoken about, and I'm new to Peru, so I don't really know the culture, but we live in a very rural area in the Andes where the pre-Hispanic culture is still alive. But there's a certain meekness in everyone that we've noticed, and like children are raised to not never speak up and think that seems strange to me as an American. But we were thinking, well, these are the people who survived the Spanish conquest. These are the survivors. The aggressive ones were probably killed, with the original Incan warriors.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they have this kind of submissive, almost, I hate to put it that way, but it's kind of a submissive culture, it seems.
If this culture has been invaded and violently dominated by another culture, their army came here and beat us, it's fair to guess that most of the people who were more aggressive patterned were in that fight and they died. And then parents raising their kids in this occupied, maybe almost slavish situation, they know, the way to survive here is to shut up and don't say anything. Don't resist at least don't resist on the outside, because
Hmm.
you'll just get in trouble and they'll put you in prison. Maybe they'll hurt you,
Yeah.
right? It is a
Yeah.
real survival strategy.
Yeah, and I'm noticing. So my dad is from Sri Lanka, which of course was under British occupation for a very long time. And something that has also kind of surprised me, upset me as an American visiting my
Mhm.
dad's culture is it's almost like cultural Stockholm syndrome for England. Like they love
Uh-huh.
everything English. Everyone wants to lighten their skin. Like a lot of things which just don't really make sense to me growing up in America. But maybe
Uh-huh.
that's even like a merging pattern where those are the ones who survived, you know,
Yeah,
during the
and
occupation.
if the dominant group has lighter skin and you want the kind of privilege that they enjoy, it makes sense to try to lighten your skin. I mean, even if it's just happening on the unconscious level, but why not join? Think of it as the situation in middle school, right? You're a kid in middle school. You're trying to find your place. Why not join the group of friends who seem to have the power and be on top? Because you'll be safer. You know, you won't be the kids who are humiliated by the ones who have the power.
Yeah, and actually, that's kind of what I thought was so interesting about Huxley's essay on how certain dominant personalities in a group or even a country or religion or society might set the tone for everyone else, whatever the pattern is. And I was mainly looking at kind of within the United States, within Western culture,
Hmm.
we see a shift, say, with feminism changing how in the 1950s women were instructed to be a certain way, and then it's very
Yeah.
different. And back then it might not fit for a woman who is ambitious, and now it might not fit for a woman who wants to be a stay-at-home mother. And there's always someone who gets kind of left out at the new cultural norm. And I've just found it interesting to think that maybe in different eras or within different subcultures there's some dominant pattern, like
Uh-huh.
victimhood culture might have been driven by some very charismatic merging types, or I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, we are all very adaptable and very creative, and we're we're sort of making it up as we go along, and we're just trying to get by.
Hmm.
So I find that very useful. And a lot of people have made the comment you made earlier that understanding people this way causes them to feel much more compassion for other people.
Hmm.
I think that's great. And that's one of the things that I love about this way of understanding people is that it brings more sense of, oh, that's why they do that. It makes sense. They're trying to feel safe, just like I'm trying to feel safe. And the
Hmm.
problem I've been having is that my way of feeling safe actually makes them feel less safe. So I could shift my behavior to do it for them the way that makes them feel safer.
Hmm.
Just like you and your relationship with your wife, people who do aggressive pattern in a romance with a person who does leaving pattern, there's always this problem of a mismatch of energy level.
Hmm.
Whenever the person who runs aggressive pattern gets excited about something, they might not be upset or angry. They might just be happy, or they might be excited, like, this is going to be great. It's such a big wave of energy that it messes with the person who is more caught in leaving pattern, and they want to get away from it. So
Yeah.
then the person who does aggressive pattern has to learn how to turn it down, because, and it's one of the two patterns I do. I tend to do rigid pattern as my primary, but aggressive is my backup. And one of the things I had to learn, which was hard for me to learn, and it was a real sense of loss in me, was I had to learn, look, I just can't hit people with that much energy, even though I'm having a good time, because it knocks them out of their body or disorganizes them, and then they're not even there to play with me anymore.
Hmm.
I have to learn to turn it down. And for me, there was a kind of a sense of grief about that.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you about because the patterns you say develop at different stages of life in a certain order.
Typically, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I don't want to be absolute about that, but in general.
Hmm. And so I was discussing with my enduring friend who we've fought a lot in the past, and we were talking about our disagreements and things like that, and how he actually was like, well, given the order as an enduring pattern, he sometimes looks up to my aggressive side, but also judges it or fears it. Whereas looking at the leaving and merging, it seems obvious. Like it seems like almost it's
You're
easy
not
to
a
judge
threat
them as
to it.
immature. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've
Because,
noticed
well,
with
I can take
ridging,
them. That's not a problem.
yeah, and I
But,
generally feel that about the first three patterns, but rigid types, I kind of maybe have a judgment sometimes, or like maybe it's like a fear judgment on some level of like, oh,
well,
they're following the rules, but they're missing something. Like it's almost like a poor person judging a rich person at times. It feels like.
we all have an inner critic. And the inner critic is the one who holds our image of, who I should be, who mom and dad wanted me to be, or my culture wanted me to be, the ideal me.
Hmm.
And then that inner critic tries to make us be more like that ideal. Even people in a meditation school, have a sort of meditation inner critic. Well, I should be meditating better today. I should be achieving more advanced spiritual state.
Hmm.
Um, but we all have an inner critic, and the inner critic basically judges. That's what it does. So everybody has judgment about people who are different, people they don't understand, people who scare them. All that stuff is natural and a part of life. The best thing we can do to handle that is to shift our own relationship with our own inner critic, to shift it from thinking that its voice is really my voice, because it's not, to realizing that it's it's trying to help me be more mom and dad's ideal, but it's the inner critic develops. It comes to sort of full development when you're only 5 or 6 years old. So it's only got the wisdom of a 6-year-old.
Hmm.
It's still trying to be a good boy or a good girl. And if you're now 40 years old, it's time to change the relationship and for you to take more authority and say, thanks for your help. I want you to sit down in the corner now. I think I can handle this.
Hmm.
And come back to your own heart center. Because going into, feeling the inner critic, letting the inner critic run things takes you away from your own heart and even away from your own core. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Are you familiar with transactional analysis?
Yeah.
Eric Burns' work.
Yeah.
Some of the things in your book reminded me of one of his books that I read on how a lot of our negative patterns or repeated like social behaviors
That's
are
right.
our inner
Games
child
people
acting
play.
out. Yeah, yeah. Our inner child acting out to get a certain usually critical response from our inner parents, which is maybe something we got as a child. I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, a lot of these things are
Yeah.
simply repetitions of what's familiar when we're young.
All of us, all these different authors, we're all looking at human beings and trying to understand human beings. So we're all studying basically the same subject. And then based on our own, beginning point of view and biases and skills and lack of skills and all that stuff, we see different parts of the puzzle. But the subject is the same.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of similarity.
Yeah.
Just like,
And,
the old story about you've got three people standing around an elephant and they're all blind, but they can touch their part of the elephant and then they describe different things, but it's all the same elephant.
yeah. And they maybe pick up on things that the others wouldn't, which is like that maybe the
Exactly.
positive side of all of these patterns, each one comes with a strength. Like I do recognize my wife is way more attuned to aesthetics and is sensitive to things that I'm kind of numb to. My enduring friends have way better stamina, even though they're slow to take action, which frustrates me. And
Yeah.
teams and
Have you
societies need
figured
this.
out what other pattern you do besides aggressive?
Well, looking at my childhood, I think I did a lot of leaving. Like, I
Hmm.
think most people who knew me growing up would assume I'm leaving because I was very
Hmm.
shy.
Hmm.
Although being aggressive made me feel really good the few times
Uh-huh.
I did it. Like
Uh-huh.
one of my most cherished childhood memories is standing up to a bully. Like it gets me emotional thinking about it. Whereas every
Uh-huh.
time I mostly did the leaving pattern, I always felt disempowered. I just didn't know what to say,
Oh
so I
yeah,
just went
well
in
you
my
don't
head.
have any power in that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean that develops at a time when you can't do anything on the physical level. The only thing you can do is leave. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So then
and
staying and fighting was a real developmental achievement for you.
yeah.
And staying and fighting and winning, like, yay, this is great.
Yeah, and honestly, I think one of the things that really resonated with the book is over the last. So I went through a very shy, introverted period, got into personal development. I think my aggressive pattern, I learned to own it, and it came out more.
Uh-huh.
I felt I was speaking the truth more. I felt empowered, but truthfully, it wasn't that great for my social relationships. Like I had a
That's
period of
right. It's
feeling
a real
really
problem.
good, but I did choose power over love. I was kind of a loner a lot,
Hmm.
even though I
Hmm.
felt very good and secure about myself. And the last couple of years have been kind of recognizing, okay, shooting truth bullets at people doesn't make friends. I do
That's
want
right.
friends, so maybe I should. And honestly, this is kind of the process I've been going through the last couple of years of trying to find the synthesis between these two ways of being. Curious if you have any thoughts on that
Yeah.
in general for people, especially in other patterns as
Well,
well.
so yeah, it's two very different patterns, which does give you access to a wide range of talents. And the part that's missing is heart center. Neither one is good at heart center. Leaving pattern is more head centered. Aggressive pattern is more belly centered. So those two maybe are online for you, and maybe heart center is not as well developed. So, what I would suggest is consciously doing things, practices, and activities that develop your heart center more. For me, I've been in a men's singing group
Hmm.
for decades, and the guy who uh, leads it, who originated it, is an incredibly heart-centered guy. Um, Older than me and the other guys in the group. He was known as everyone's favorite uncle.
Hmm.
And being in his presence and the way he held a non-judgmental space for us all to sing together, and then introduced these lovely chants from all over the world, um, I noticed that being in that group and doing that chanting would move me more into my heart center, and I really loved it.
Hmm. That's
So,
interesting.
find things that help you move more into your heart center. Could be
Yeah.
singing, dancing, poetry. Could be something that your wife can sort of take the lead in.
Yeah, I was actually going to say she's going to love that you said that. She's always telling me to feel my heart. And I'm like, I don't have time to feel my heart. Like I have things to do, you know.
I don't
And
have time, and
actually,
I don't even know what it is, so I don't even.
well,
I
I
don't fail
remember
at that. I don't want to try that.
I used to play music a lot until my adolescence when I think my aggression and I started to develop confidence for the first time, and I kind of
Mhm.
judged singing as like the source of my unhappiness actually, and I turned it off actually. And I've thought about like maybe that wasn't a good thing to do
Right.
overall, but it was something I was trying to cope with.
So the goal, I think, for all of us is to integrate head center, heart center, and belly center. So they're all within our core, and they're all fully online, and they're all aligned and connected. They're all functioning together. So what that means is whatever is your least developed, you need to develop more.
Mhm.
That's all.
Yeah,
And it's going to be there. We're all going to have something that's less developed.
yeah,
So let's not get all judgy about it. Let's just practice.
awesome. Yeah, well, I really loved your book. I was like very pleasantly surprised to have gotten so much out of it.
I'm very glad you
People
did.
can find it, Five Personality Patterns on Amazon. Actually, I've been telling everyone who I've been recommending this to, it's also on Amazon. What's it called? Amazon Unlimited in 5 parts. If anyone
Oh
has,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah.
assume that gets more downloads that way, which I think is a smart move. But it's like if you have it already, it's free basically.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I originally did that to sort of attract attention to it.
Hmm.
And yeah, and some people prefer the audio version. Some people prefer the print version.
Hmm.
And I'm halfway through writing a second book, which is going to be about using this way of understanding people to have better relationships.
Oh,
It's
cool.
basically, learn about the map, learn which patterns you tend to get stuck in, and when you're thinking, well, I'd like to have a better relationship with that person, think about, well, what patterns do they appear to get stuck in? And then each each chapter will have very specific things for you to do to shift the way you approach that person, so that you do it in a style, sort of in a mother tongue that is easier for them to deal with.
Hmm.
Sort of you have to meet them where they are on their wavelength, in their way of communicating, because they're not paying attention to the channels you normally use.
Hmm. Interesting.
So my hope is that will help people have even better relationships.
Cool. Do you know when that'll be coming out roughly?
I would say it'll probably be next summer of
Cool.
2024,
Awesome.
2024.
Well, I'll definitely look out for it. And we'll include your website and links to the books with the show. Anything
Yeah.
else you're working on that you want to share about?
I'm starting to do work with corporations.
Hmm.
There are some people who are executive coaches for C-suite people in big corporations, who are inviting me to come in and do trainings for their managers to help introduce their managers to this way of understanding people. The idea being, of course, that a manager who understands self and employer and employees this way can manage everybody better, can
Hmm.
appreciate the different skills that different people have, assemble a team in which, they think like, what skills do I need to make sure I have on this team, and who shall I get because they're really good at this. Um, and so that, you know, basically the corporation will wind up being more productive and more profitable because they are training their employees to understand each other this way. Now, my hope is that since corporations are probably the biggest, strongest force in the entire world, that will spread this way of understanding people across the world. And maybe we won't have to have wars so much with each other, you know?
Hmm. That's
Maybe
awesome.
we'll be able to solve our problems in a way that's a little more efficient than just blowing everything up.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you again so much, Stephen.
Thank
This
you
was
for
great.
inviting me. It's been a real pleasure.